This is part 2 of my series of homilies for the Symbang Gabi Masses in preparation for Christmas. And so today, we're going to continue our journey with Mary and Joseph, who began in Nazareth and are going to Bethlehem. This is about a 90-mile journey, and on day 4, they're about 40 miles into the journey, right? If they do about 10 miles a day. But that's not going to necessarily go according to plan in some ways. Today, Joseph wakes up from last night feeling just so good, so confident, so in love with Mary, and feeling that even though he's still got some major questions in his heart and his mind, he just feels really good today. And he can tell that Mary feels the same way. And so as they get back up on the trail, things are going really well. Now, they're beginning to walk through an area that we've all heard about. It's an area called Samaria. And so the people in this area are not Jewish per se. There are origins where they are connected, but these are people who have by and large left the faith many years ago, many generations ago. And so there's animosity, there's, if you could call it racism or prejudices that are there, but they're journeying through Samaria at this time. And you can remember some of the stories that Jesus told of his time in Samaria. Well, as they're journeying, a woman walking along beside them sees Mary very pregnant. And so she congratulates Mary, and assuming that this is Joseph's baby, congratulates Joseph. And this woman turns to Joseph and says, "Have you named your child? Do you have a name for your child?" Joseph, pausing for a little bit, because now things start flooding back to him. How was he named? And what a little bit of an odd question, right? Because for most people who are pregnant, at this time, they wouldn't know if it was a boy or a girl. Maybe they would have a couple optional names, right? And generally, culturally speaking, this was the duty of the man, the husband, to do the naming. But Joseph realized he didn't name this child. Someone did. And so he responds to this woman by being very honest and saying, he has been named. The child has been named. But now Joseph begins to have a lot of questions coming up. When is the world going to know? When is the world going to know about Jesus? And how? Are they going to have to bring Jesus out? I mean, how is that all going to happen? How is the world going to come to know this child? Joseph doesn't really have answers to those questions. They reach a small town. At this point in the journey, Joseph needs to get some provisions. So he leaves Mary. She's resting. She's fine. There's many other very good people right there in that area. So he goes a little bit farther into town alone to buy a few things for them on their journey. Mary is looking around and notices another woman who's very pregnant. She's a Samaritan. She talks to her a little bit. What she does not know, and the other woman does not know, is that their babies are going to meet one day. Jesus and the Samaritan woman who is pregnant with a little girl. You see, their lives are going to be very different growing up. Jesus is going to grow up in a home where prayer, song, stories, Bible stories, lots of love, lots of stability are going to be present. He's going to be dearly loved. This little girl is not going to have any songs. There's not going to be any Bible stories. There will be no prayer and very little stability. Because where she's going to live, people really don't believe in God. And her life's going to be very unsettled growing up. But one day she's going to encounter Jesus. And he's going to speak to her heart. He's going to speak to her soul. And he's going to do it by first naming the brokenness in her life. And he's going to say, you are right. The man you are with now is not your husband, for you've had 5 husbands. And by naming her brokenness, he's going to give her permission and the ability to find mercy, forgiveness, and healing, and the ability to say yes to God. In reality, she's going to become the very first Samaritan evangelist who one day is going to run back into that same town where Joseph is right now. And she's going to tell them about Jesus, which, lo and behold, becomes, if you will, part of the answer to one of Joseph's questions that he has in his heart. And that is, how will the world come to know? The good thing for Joseph is that it's not necessarily on his shoulders. You know how we do that sometimes? We put the burden on ourselves, which belongs to God. And those are usually moments when we have lots of stress and anxiety because we're trying to carry his burden and not our own. And so part of this, in Joseph learning to surrender this question, will then allow God to be able to answer the question. Earlier in the day, Joseph had learned from some of his previous issues, if you will, to vocalize his questions to Mary. And so he did ask her, how will the world know? How will we tell them? Well, as they settle in for the night of day 4, without almost missing a beat, Mary just whispers to Joseph and says, God will show us. God will show us. Day 5. Day 5, Joseph's getting up, he's breaking camp, and all of a sudden he just stops. He's like, tomorrow's Friday. Tomorrow's Friday, right? Which means the next day is Saturday. That's the Sabbath. And so all of a sudden Joseph realizes he's losing a day because on the Sabbath they can't walk. They can't journey at all. And so he begins to think, oh my goodness, how are we going to make up this time? Because we have to be there in a certain period of time, right? How are we going to get there? So he talks to Mary. And the two of them decide that today they need to journey twice as far. They haven't been pushing it physically that hard. And they're getting settled in. Joseph's not sore anymore. Mary's doing okay. And so today the plan is they're going to go twice as far. They're going to try and cover 20 miles so that they can, or just maybe not 20 miles, but so that they can make up for the fact there's a day that they can't journey at all. Well, as they get out on the path, Mary's in a lot of pain. This is not going to work. And so they realize that this plan is not God's plan. If anything, now they have to go slower and they have to take more stops. And ordinarily, Joseph probably would be getting really frustrated at this point. But he's learning how to surrender things. He's learning how to give things over, yes, to God, but also to Mary. And so he's just learning now how to constantly talk and get these things out with Mary so that the two of them carry it together. And he's okay. But things are not going according to plan. Perhaps God has a different plan. You ever notice how when God has a different plan and things don't go according to our plan, something happens that wouldn't have happened if we had had our way, if things had gone according to plan? Today is going to be one of those days. Joseph, who was a carpenter, had seen along the way some people who had people in their party who were struggling like Mary. And he noticed, and he had studied them a little bit, that some people had constructed little carriages that they put up on their donkey, right? So that the person can sit and be a little bit more relaxed, almost like a little chair that's cushioned, instead of just sitting up on the animal. Joseph can easily build something like this. He just needs a little bit of time and some materials. So they come into this one town, and they agree that this is something that they should do. So he's going to build a little carriage for Mary to put up on Fred, the donkey, right? This town, though, is weird. You ever been in a town like that? This town is dark. This town is not friendly. And Joseph immediately realizes that there's just this darkness. There's this element, there's drunkenness, right? There's sin. There's like debauchery. It's just a really, really horrible, dark place. And so Joseph just wants to get out of this town as fast as possible. And so he goes a little bit farther into the town to get the materials. And he gets the materials and he builds this carriage as quickly as possible. And then they get out of that town as quickly as possible. Mary and Joseph both have just witnessed something that just made them feel very uncomfortable, almost dirty, right? They never really experienced something quite like that before. I don't know if it was all the travelers out on the road that just kind of brought the worst out of the people in this town. They don't know. But as they're leaving this town, they realize the world needs a Savior. And so Joseph's prayer, his personal quiet prayer as he's walking along, becomes much deeper. He begins to pray for the world. He begins to pray for the brokenness in the world, and the horrible sins that are committed every day, and just how many people are really, truly lost in their lives. And Mary, too, is going much deeper in her prayer. Her prayer is more intentional and serious because she's praying for the people that she just saw. And so this is not a day of necessarily being judgmental or hateful towards these people, but they both, as they talk that night together, say they need a Savior. They really need a Savior. And they know deep down that God has chosen them to help bring the world that Savior. Day 6. Day 6 is the Sabbath. Day 6 is the Sabbath. They can't walk. They can't journey. Well, they found actually a nice place, if you will, to set up camp for the day. And they actually found a little community of people from Bethlehem. And so, I should say, people journeying to Bethlehem. And so they all kind of have a common ancestry. Well, this day is a day to rest, to relax, to pray. Nothing too intentional or serious about this day. But there's a rabbi in their group. There's a rabbi as part of this wider group. And so they have time to pray with him, with the whole community, to gather. And the rabbi just takes this incredible joy in this moment to be able to talk about all the stories about Bethlehem because they all share in the ancestry. And so he talks to them about King David and how he was one of the shepherds out in the hills and how he was plucked out of that by God to lead this nation. And they're just all totally enjoying this day of stories and reminiscing and feeling like they are part of such a beautiful part of the history of Israel. But there's a time in the evening where this rabbi becomes a little more serious, and he begins to talk about the prophecies of the coming Messiah. And he begins to challenge the people that they need to be watching for this Messiah. They need to know these prophecies. They need to be ready. Not that they can do anything about it, but they need to be ready. And he talks to them specifically about the prophecy from the book of Micah. And he reminds them that this Messiah is going to come from Bethlehem. He's going to come from them, from their heritage. And people are really, really in tune to this. And Mary and Joseph realize, as they look over at each other, that this is happening. This is now. This is their son. This is Jesus that they're talking about. And Joseph looks at Mary and sees Mary beginning to tremble. Not fear, but tremble just from the enormity that this is real. And there's this excitement and nervousness in that excitement. At one point, there's someone who pipes up, a young man pipes up as the rabbi's talking, and he says, we need this Messiah because one day when this Messiah comes, he'll overthrow these Romans. The Romans were their oppressors, right? And he's going to overthrow them. And the rabbi says, This Messiah is not going to have one king come to him and bow down and worship to him. Bow down to him. Every king is going to come and kneel before this Messiah, this king. Every king from the day he comes until the end of the world, this will be the one and only king that they will come and kneel before. And Mary and Joseph, this evening, go to sleep with just a profound sense of the enormity of God's plan and how the world's never going to be the same. And they are part of that plan. I'm going to conclude here, part 2, and I will begin with part 3 with the next series of days, 7, 8, and 9. All right, God bless.